So let's begin with what you do at Confluent, Andrews.
Sure. So my name's Andrew Sellers. I lead Confluent's technology strategy group. So it's a multidisciplinary team that consists of research technologists. So these are people that look across the landscape and figure out ways to make our tech better. So CockroachDB comes out with a new replication protocol. To the extent we're allowed under license, we'll reverse engineer and benchmark and figure out if we can make Kafka and Flink better and then make our internal offerings better. And so we do a lot of work looking at both what we're building internally and what everyone else builds. The next part of that team is our customer product advisory boards and then also our global field CTOs. So our field CTOs are meant to engage kind of all personas at all levels, but they're really targeted at technical executives. And so the idea there is that they can help communicate the business value of the data streaming platform. And part of that work then is they find patterns and look across industries and figure out the solutions that the DSP is used in, say, manufacturing or in medtech or FinServ or something. And it's really great to have that team, because what that means then is, on behalf of Jay and our other executive team, I can help be a sort of an arbiter between the natural tension that comes up between, let's say, the R&D org and the go-to-market organization. Sometimes if things aren't going well, the go-to-market team will say, hey, product, different features or whatever, and the product team will point and say, no, you need to educate and influence the market differently. And so I act as a bit of an honest broker in those discussions and help us, distill the insights one gets from the market, from the customers, from prospects, and the wider technology landscape to make sure that we're building the right things and that we're doing it well.
Fantastic. So that's such a dynamic role that you're looking at, Andrews. I would want to start this conversation with the shift. I remember Jay very well, pointed that out, the shift that we are looking at when it comes to business intelligence and artificial intelligence.
Yes.
Right. So I would like to know from you that this entire gamut, with the rise of artificial intelligence, we are seeing a shift towards real-time predictive and even generative insights in today's time. How do you see this transition reshaping the business strategies across industries? That's one.
Yep.
And is AI really complementing or replacing BI in decision-making when it comes to the business globally?
Yeah, a good question. So kind of take the first one first, the shift that we're seeing. I think what's happening is that in order to be more competitive, businesses need to be more reactive. There's almost this idea of shortening the time between observing and deciding and then actually reacting to what's happened. I think before it was enough in that BI world to gather a bunch of operational data, to put it into a report once a week and have some executive decision maker look at it and then think through what kind of decisions that we make. I think that for the really competitive firms now, that decision loop has got to be so much tighter. We take operational data because of the technologies, that everything comes together and that we can then say, okay, there's, this inventory is in the right place, or we're, really growing the business here and this is where we need to resource and allocate things differently. And I think it's possible now to do all that in real time using technologies like data streaming and artificial intelligence. And I think for the really competitive firms, it's such a wonderful ability to be able to think faster than your competitors. And so that's what I think the delivery model is. And so while I don't think business intelligence exactly is going away, I do think that there is, I do think it's important to, rather than be, kind of backwards looking the way BI tends to be, we want to be more predictive and we want to be sort of more incremental in how we look at these things so we get a real-time view. You wouldn't want to cross the street on data that's 5 minutes old. You want to know if that car is coming right now. And that's the difference with data streaming. And that's also, I think, where artificial intelligence can really help too, is that I think there's a lot of rote mechanical things we do in the enterprise that these foundation models are really good at helping supplant. But they can only do it if they're well contextualized with the most relevant and sort of most trustworthy data. And so that's where I think a lot of that revolution kind of comes from, the BI to AI shift. Okay. And then your second question, just remind me again, the second part was about, I'm sorry, can you just tell me one more time?
So I just wanted to know about this entire reshaping, how it's reshaping the decision-making when it comes to the businesses globally, if you want to, maybe, let's take FinTech, the most revenued market for Confluent.
Sure.
How do you think it's changing, because with the Tableflow launch, right?
Yes.
How do you think it's going to change?
So I think that you heard Sean talk about this, that the detritus of the legacy of the way we've delivered software is
Right.
we do tend to have these systems in one place that operate the business,
Mm-hmm.
and they're run by particular personas.
Okay.
And then we have these other personas that take the data from the business and find insight and make decisions from them.
Okay.
And because of how things have gone for the last 30 years, those kind of exist in different camps, and so we've tried for a long time to try and get those people on the analytics side to use our technologies. And I think the challenge there, and that, ultimately this is why it's good to listen to the market. There's no reason a data scientist can't write a Kafka consumer, but they don't. And so I think that what's better then is you got to kind of meet people where they are. And so I think an important aspect of that then is that so much of the OLAP tools and so much of the way that like the data scientists and data engineers work and think is they think more in tables. And what's very important then is that rather than have this bridge across these things that can be really rough, can create really hard consistency issues because it takes a while and you've got this more infrastructure to maintain that can break. We want to deliver an experience that basically is fully consistent and abstracts away the delivery model. And so in a sense, it's democratizing the same data access across the enterprise. Applications and app developers that want to consume data as streams, well, they can. Data scientists and AI and BI analysts that want to consume data as a table, well, they get to consume the same data as a table. And neither has to think too hard about like how that data originated. We're materializing a consistent view. So if it's a table, we give it to you as a table. Mm-hmm. If you like using streams, then we give it to you as a stream. Okay. And I think that ends up being really important to finally then bridge those estates. And so that's where I think the biggest transformation happens in FinServ and other places, where instead of having these two information silos mm-hmm. in the business, we're breaking that barrier down. And I think that's really important for AI as well. And you heard that it's AI is this analytics problem, as Jay said, but it also is operational because it's got to exist in real time. It's got to react and actually power your business. And so that's really what we're so excited for TableFlow to enable.
Wonderful. Now, I'll just put across AI and data streaming, right?
Yes.
Confluent as a data streaming platform processes vast amount of data, and yep. that too in real time, right? You were
yes.
just talking about it.
Yep.
With multiple layers of predictive and generative AI at play, which we see these days happening,
yep.
And trustworthiness of AI that we'll talk of the outputs here. What safeguards or validation techniques do you recommend to the industry leaders or to the enterprises, Andrews?
So it's a great question. I think one of the things that's absolutely true about AI is if you have data that's not trustworthy or not correct, it's even more expensive than it was before when you had more humans in the loop, because it's more insidious and it's harder for AI to detect those things. So the thing that we recommend to our customers is to move data governance and that validation as close to production of the data as you can. So this is what we talk about when we say shift left. It's about using like data quality rules to the second the data is produced to validate that it is in a good form. Because in general, it's more expensive to handle errors the further kind of right they are, or in another way of saying it's closer to the consumer. And so what we really want is to make sure that we're validating data up front. We're using technologies like Flink to assure that the data is what the business needs. Because the challenge, if it gets too far along, if it's in your data lake, if I've got data in Databricks that's not trustworthy, well, now it's really hard to reason about where that even came from or what it should even look like. Whereas if I'm doing it as soon as data is produced, well, I know what the producer should look like, and then it's far easier to isolate like where the thing happened. If I have this sort of cascading series of transformations, and all the way over here, I then realize, oh, this data is not correct. It can be really hard to understand which of those transformations caused that error. But if I'm doing it right away, and I'm sort of consistently checking and making sure the data is right, well, it can be a lot easier and a lot more cost-effective to the business to diagnose errors. And because the data is trustworthy, my time to market for new applications and new insights, it's so much faster.
What is the real ideal runtime for this? Andres, if you want to maybe just talk of the deployment part when businesses adopt these.
Yeah.
What is the practical or pragmatic runtime of these predictions that happens? Would you want to highlight on those in any use case space that you want to share with us?
So in terms of insights with the data,
yes,
it is close to real time. I mean, again, I think there are it varies a bit by industry, and the one thing we find is that with a lot of the analytics workloads, sort of the cascading nature of these batch-oriented workflows can mean that if I run something once an hour, but then there's like 2 or 3 of those in a row, well, now my data is hours old. And so if I do it instead sort of incremental by design using streaming, the insights, can typically be delivered within seconds or maybe even minutes. Again, a single sort of end-to-end kind of producer to consumer in Confluent, is, let's say, 100 milliseconds or something. And so for most use cases, that's okay. I think that where it's really challenging is when you're using something like that's batch oriented and maybe the data takes hours or a day. And even then what I sort of see, the new snapshot, is still sort of old data. And so for a lot of use cases, that just isn't sufficient. And so, there's, very real-time applications of this and things that we power. So, we have, big customers that in, let's say financial markets or something, that are using Kafka, not to do the actual trading itself, because that's all done with like dedicated, very specialized hardware. But, we'll actually do the reconciliation of the trades. There's even a lot of like, we'll say over the counter OTC kinds of markets, so the supply side's actually run with Confluent itself. And so it really is fast enough for many of what we say are real-time use cases, up until, the things that are really measured in, let's say, single milliseconds. And it turns out that market just isn't very big. I think in a practical sense, there's trade-offs one can make in design, but these technologies really are, good enough for, we'll say, like the latency needs of most applications. Again, I think that, let's say real, high frequency trading or something, like there are exceptions, but there are not that many of exceptions, I mean, but it's like if 100 milliseconds is enough, then we can, or is where it needs to be, then, we can probably reason within that. There's a lot of sort of engineering and performance tuning that can be done, both in the way that you're, the big thing with applications is it's eliminating synchronous calls typically. And then in terms of sort of what you can do in terms of parallelizing, Confluent Cloud itself as well. There's some tricks and things you can do. The trade-off is money. And so if the budget's unlimited, we can get it pretty fast.
So the reason why I asked this question is because, quote unquote, we've started living with the lifestyle of as soon as possible and on the basis of clicks and waits these days.
Yes, that's right.
Andrews, right?
Yeah.
So customers out there, I'm sure, would want the fastest possible deployment when it comes to the runtime.
Yeah.
I'll just move to the next segment of.
I could give a couple customer examples. So, like one, we have like Whatnot that does literally real time, recommendations for like auctions. And so, this is something. It's a really cool use case that is you use Confluent to basically match customers to auctions of interest for them. And so there's think of it like the different kinds of sites where I've got someone selling something and other people are all bidding and asking for it. If I've got many of those going on at once, it can be a real challenge to know which are the most relevant to me. And so using artificial intelligence, Whatnot actually has every customer, shows them, hey, these are what we think the auctions of interest for you. Okay. And that model is tuned in real time. So, within a few hundred milliseconds, we're going to present you with the most relevant, auctions for you, which feels very reactive. And so like in some of these e-commerce, use cases, we're delivering personalized experiences, as sort of as fast as you feel like you can consume them. They're certainly fast enough for humans to sort of make it feel instantaneous. And so,
I wish I had time to understand the entire fundamental of this functioning. How do they do this auction and recommendation?
We have a blog post I can share with you. You can read it up. Yeah, so we wrote
I would love to.
We wrote it up in a blog post, so you can read more. Yeah.
Let's talk about data quality and AI. Bring it together.
Sure.
What are the best practices that you ensure when it comes to maintaining high quality, reliable data for AI models when working with real-time streams? Because that is one of the most important things when it comes to Confluent, as well as when you address your customer demands.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I mean, so again, at Confluent, we're not going to sell you an LLM. We're not going to, invent an embedding model or something. Our whole thing is being the data substrate. And so it's really about having sort of complete contextualized data. And so, one of the truisms of my career, having done AI for about 20 years now, I've been doing it far longer than I've been doing data streaming. It's what I went to graduate school for. I spent most of my career as either an ML researcher or someone who commercialized AI-enabled technologies. And in that time, one of the absolute truisms has always been that really great, complete, contextualized data with off-the-shelf models, it always outperforms limited data with the best-in-class models. And so it seems obvious to say that, but there's a lot of times with, I think, enterprises where they really want to throw the resources at improving the model quality or whatever, when really they should be investing in making their data better. And that's really what we emphasize. The thing with events is because they're sort of seen and meant to be consumed each independently, a big part of it is governance in terms of, governance is not just about sort of assuring the provenance of data where it came from. It's also about contextualizing it well.
Correct.
About making sure that I'm not just taking these highly normalized relations that have a bunch of foreign key references. Like, that's no good to an LLM. It's having a complete view of what everything is, and then having a common understanding of what it means. And so for us, that's really about doing that at production. And so the thing that's in favor now with, like, if I use data lakes like Snowflake and Databricks, is these so-called multi-hop architectures. Medallion is one of those where you have sort of this bronze, silver, gold succession. What we're really about is creating at least a silver layer in real time of making these data products we talk about. Data is a reusable asset. If we look at the data streaming platform itself, those four components of stream, process, connect, govern, what they really are is the minimum set of capabilities necessary to make data a reusable asset. And so when we say that we're getting ready for AI with our data, what we really encourage our customers to think about is making data consumable. What are the consumption patterns? How do we make it something that is not just a bespoke kind of fit for purpose stream, but something that many would need? And in order for it to be that way, it needs to be discoverable, and it needs to be complete. And it needs to be something that, a microservice or an AI agent can make sense of.
All right. So, with sort of announcements that have been put today out,
Yes.
on behalf of Confluent, we see a lot of innovations happening, especially in the coming time, right? From hiring to market expansion to maybe innovating the market with a lot more technological innovations.
Yes.
Tell us, what innovations do you actually foresee at the intersection of AI and streaming data in the next maybe 3 to 5 years?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think there's going to be a few. I think on the one side, I do think AI is going to make data streaming better. And by that I mean, we talked a lot about governance and how important and foundational it is to getting this right. And I think the foundation models can actually help us do governance better. Okay. Governance in many ways is a metadata problem. It's a metadata creation problem. Okay. So much of what happens today is that these projects begin as just a single team that's basically decoupling systems, and so they're producing a bunch of data, and since they're the consumers of that data, they don't bother to write a schema, or they don't bother to use good tagging, or they don't bother to have good field descriptions or create other kinds of metadata. Well, they might if instead of having to do all that from scratch, we had an LLM that took 100 events and induced a schema and suggested to them, or took the producer code and induced an async API specification from that and suggested it to the developer. And that way the developer can quickly say, like, oh, yep, that's consistent, that's what I expect, and register that in a catalog. Because governance really is, in the end, it's really a metadata problem. Okay. And it's most of the time when there are governance challenges, it's because metadata is incomplete. And so I think that's going to be a big thing that's going to happen across the industry. We're certainly looking at it, but many others are too, of better sort of assurance of data quality, because this is something the foundation models are really good at, sort of recognizing kind of the structure of a thing and summarizing it. There's going to be other models, and they're more statistical kinds of things and less ML, but are really good at things like anomaly detection and getting very granular with that as well. And so where we have sort of these axiomatic-based sort of rules that are declaratively defined by people today, I think we can actually use like statistical, kinds of tools to automatically infer that using, ML in the next few years too. And so I think our data and the data, the trustworthiness of data will become more and more automatic because AI is going to do more of that for us in the next 3 to 5 years. So I think that's the first thing. The other thing with the intersection of AI is I do think that that the needs of real-time data as a competitive differentiator is going to be more important, in the next 3 to 5 years. That it's okay now to have some delay or some old data. I just don't think that's going to be okay soon. And so I think streaming is going to be even more relevant to AI, sort of operationalization than it is today. And it already is pretty important. I think that we're going to get better. I think that sort of right now the foundation models are sort of treated like black boxes. I think some of that is going to go, is going to get, at least broken up a little bit. I think like specialized small language models, SLMs, I think are going to get trained more and more in real time. And I think that they're going to be delivered in real time and contextualized in real time. And we're going to do bias characterization in real time. Those are all data streaming challenges. You can't really do any of those things without data streams. And so I think that the dependence of AI on data streaming is already there. I think it's going to get even stronger in the next 3 to 5 years.
Great. So one last bit that I want to understand when it comes to the developer community or the engineers out there. Andres, when we talk of the entire automation, AI has been into the debate whether it'll threaten to jobs specifically for the techies out there.
Yep.
We are focusing on this automation so much that the threat has been lowering for quite some time, and people are really worried on that part, that the job role or the kind of functionality that they are maybe catering right now would be, just might be taken away.
Yeah.
What's your stand? What's your opinion out there if I talk of the future?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I think when ChatGPT first came out, everyone speculated, like, oh, this is going to replace us all. I will say that hasn't materialized yet.
Yes.
I think for all of our customers, what we're really seeing over the last 18 months or so, I've had the opportunity to talk to over 130 of our customers, specifically about their aspirations for artificial intelligence and how the data streaming platform helps enable that. And I'll be the first to admit, if they're talking to me, there is sort of this bias toward real-time data. But what we're seeing now, the customers that have actually gotten something to production and are actually getting ROI from it, typically that ROI is measured in increased productivity of internal knowledge workers. And so you're taking some rote mechanical part of their job and you're automating it. And you're not really replacing anybody yet. I think that we always have these fears when new technology comes out. I think that during the Industrial Revolution, we're like, oh, we're getting better at textile processing. And so all these people are going to lose their jobs. And instead, what really happened is instead of having, 2 sets of clothes, everyone now has a closet full of clothes. And there's a fashion industry. And so I think economists study this stuff, that I think as things become more accessible, I think it does increase demand. And so I think that we're going to see more need for workers that are augmented by and made more productive by these generative AI technologies, and not that they're necessarily going to get replaced. But I think that does mean that certain jobs are probably going to change. And I think that where humans add value is going to probably change. I think in some ways, we used to have human calculators, that were really good at, doing multiplication very quickly or whatever. And that's how, we actually had space programs and did very sophisticated things that way. But no one does that anymore because, machines took over that. And so I do think that some of the work will change, but I do think the net demand on humans, I think is going to be, maybe this is optimistic, but I do think that, we're still going to see lots of opportunities for humans sort of augmented by AI.
I'm sure, because the decision making in the end has to be involved by a human brain.
Yeah.
The input that we give.
Yeah.
It's just the mechanism in between that's being automated, and the output is used by humans. So yeah, I think very, very optimistic. I'm sure people who when they listen to you about the optimism that you've brought to the table and what Confluent is doing, Andrew, it's a great thing out there.
Good.
And when it comes to India, we're looking forward to a lot more engagement with Confluent and in the Indian market.
We're so glad to be here, and again, we have so many great partners here and customers here, and so this has just been wonderful for us to be here. Yeah.
So we hope you enjoy your time here and the coming time that you plan to spend with India, and from the business standpoint as well, Andrews. Lovely catching up with you.
It was great to see you. Thanks so much for making the trip. And
Thank you.
It's such a pleasure to see you.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks.